Pulitzer-nominated journalist Rachel Kovalski struggles to balance career ambition with lingering questions about her grandmother's strange obsession with apocalyptic prophecies, finding solace in the ordered chaos of her Manhattan apartment and late-night research sessions. When the 112th Pope suddenly dies and unprecedented natural phenomena begin occurring worldwide, Rachel discovers a massive government conspiracy to control information about these events, with her own trusted editor deeply involved in the cover-up. Now Rachel must race against time as tech billionaire Ezra Hammond prepares to harness the strange, atmospheric manifestation above New York City for mass mind control. While the mysterious light in the sky grows increasingly complex, developing patterns that suggest it might have an agenda of its own. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from. Subscribe to our channel, it's free and you can always change your mind. Enjoy the story. The world didn't end with a bang, but with a news bulletin. Rachel Kovalski was halfway through her third cup of coffee when the CNN breaking news alert cut through the mundane buzz of her Manhattan apartment. She barely registered it at first, just another interruption in a day filled with deadlines. But then the words penetrated her caffeine-fogged brain. The 88-year-old leader of the Catholic Church found dead in his private chambers. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Coffee splashed across her bare feet, but she didn't feel it. All she could hear was her grandmother's voice, crackling like an old vinyl record in her memory. When the 112th Pope draws his final breath, child, that's when the real countdown begins. 16 years as an investigative journalist had taught Rachel to question everything. Yet as she stared at the solemn faces on the television screen, a chill that had nothing to do with the spilled coffee crawled up her spine. "Get it together, Kovalski," she muttered to herself, grabbing a dishcloth to clean up the mess. "It's just a coincidence." But the words of her grandmother, Mary Petrova, Russian immigrant with an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure religious texts, wouldn't leave her alone. As a child, Rachel had sat at her kitchen table in Brooklyn, eating pierogies and listening to Grandma Mary's stories about saints and prophecies with the same half-believing wonder she'd given to fairy tales. The prophecy of Saint Malachi had been different, though. Mary hadn't told it like a story, but like a warning. "The Irish saint saw it all," she'd said, her accent thickening with intensity. 112 popes, each with a motto. And after the last one, Petrus Romanus, they say, comes the judgment. Rachel grabbed her phone and called her mother. "Did you hear about the Pope?" she asked without preamble when Elena Kovalski answered. "Yes, it's all over the news," her mother replied. "Why? Remember Grandma's stories? About the prophecy?" A pause. "Rachel, you're a grown woman with a Pulitzer nomination. Please tell me you're not taking Mama's superstition seriously." Rachel pinched the bridge of her nose. Her mother, Dr. Elena Kovalski, professor of physics at Columbia, had spent a lifetime distancing herself from what she called her mother's old country nonsense. "I'm not saying I believe it," Rachel said, "but don't you find it a little strange? The timing, I mean." "What I find strange is my rational daughter calling me about medieval prophecies at 7:30 in the morning," Elena replied, but her tone had softened. "Look, your grandmother believed a lot of things. It doesn't mean they were true." "I know that," Rachel said, watching the continued coverage on her television. "But I was thinking about her journals." "Did you keep them after she died?" Another pause. "They're in storage." "Why?" "Professional curiosity," Rachel said, the lie coming easily. "I'm thinking of doing a piece on religious prophecies and their cultural impact. Grandma's materials would make good background research." Her mother didn't sound entirely convinced, but she agreed to locate the journals and have them sent to Rachel's apartment. After ending the call, Rachel sat down at her laptop and began what any good journalist would do: research. She pulled up databases, scholarly articles, religious texts, anything related to the prophecy of Saint Malachi. Most mainstream sources dismissed it as a 16th century forgery rather than an authentic 12th century vision. The list of 112 popes, each with a cryptic Latin motto, had been remarkably accurate for popes who had already reigned when the prophecy was first published in 1595, but became vague and questionable for subsequent pontiffs. "Convenient," Rachel muttered, taking notes. The current pope, the recently deceased pope, had indeed been the 112th since the alleged prophecy was written. His motto in the prophecy was supposed to be Gloria Olivae, or Glory of the Olive, which some interpreted as a reference to the Olivetan order, though the late pontiff had no direct connection to it. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her editor, Daniel Park. "Where's that piece on city council corruption?" Deadline was yesterday. Reality crashed back. She had actual work to do. Paid work that didn't involve chasing childhood memories of doomsday predictions. Rachel quickly replied that she'd have the draft to him by noon, then reluctantly closed her prophecy research tabs. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something worth investigating here. Not the supernatural aspects. Rachel prided herself on her rationality, but perhaps the cultural and psychological impact of such prophecies in times of global uncertainty. It might make for an interesting sidebar piece if nothing else. She spent the next few hours finishing her city council exposé, a solid piece of investigative work that detailed kickbacks and sweetheart deals in the city's waste management contracts. After submitting it to Daniel, she allowed herself to return to the Malachi prophecy. This time she dug deeper, beyond the mainstream academic dismissals, into forums and websites dedicated to prophecy interpretation. Most were filled with the kind of religious fervor that made Rachel uncomfortable. But occasionally she found thoughtful analyses that looked at historical patterns and symbolic interpretations without apocalyptic hysteria. One site in particular caught her attention, a scholarly blog run by Dr. Thomas Riley, professor of theological history at Boston College. Unlike the doomsday prophets, Riley approached the prophecy from a historical critical perspective, analyzing its origins, transmission, and the socio-political context of its creation. Rachel sent him an email, identifying herself as a journalist researching the cultural impact of prophetic traditions. To her surprise, he replied within the hour, "Ms. Kovalski, your inquiry comes at an interesting time. I've been fielding calls from journalists all day, but few approach this topic with the analytical framework you've outlined. I'd be happy to speak with you. Perhaps even more interesting than the prophecy itself is the modern response to it, how institutions manage public reaction to such symbolic moments. Are you familiar with the work of Mary Petrova on this subject? Her monograph, Prophetic Traditions Across Cultural Boundaries, remains one of the most clear-eyed analyses of how apocalyptic prophecies function in collective psychology. I'm available for a call tomorrow morning if that suits your schedule. Regards, Thomas Riley, PhD." Rachel stared at the screen, a chill running through her again. How did this professor know about her grandmother's work? Mary had been many things: immigrant, storyteller, keeper of traditions, but never an academic author as far as Rachel knew. She quickly replied, accepting his offer to talk and asking for clarification about the monograph he'd mentioned. While waiting for his response, Rachel's phone rang. It was Daniel. "Good piece on the council," he said, skipping pleasantries as usual. "But I need you on something else now. There's some weird interference affecting satellite communications and power grids along the East Coast. Scientists are saying it's related to solar flare activity, but my source at NOAA says there's more to it. I want you to look into it." Rachel was about to protest that she wasn't a science reporter, but something stopped her. Solar anomalies. Wasn't that part of what her grandmother had mentioned? Signs in the heavens, she'd called them. "I'll take it," Rachel said. "Send me what you have." After hanging up, she turned on the TV again. The Pope's death was still the lead story, but now a secondary headline was running across the bottom of the screen. "Massive solar flare detected. Comms disruptions expected." Rachel felt that same prickle along her spine. Coincidence? It had to be. Her email pinged with a message from Daniel containing preliminary information about the solar event. Included was a classified briefing that had been leaked to him by his NOAA source. As Rachel scanned it, particular phrases jumped out at her. Unprecedented magnitude exceeding all historical measurements. Usual characteristics not consistent with standard coronal mass ejection models. Possible impact on geological stability in addition to electromagnetic systems. The last point caught Rachel's attention. Geological stability? Since when did solar flares affect tectonic activity? She pulled up recent seismic reports and noticed something odd. A series of small earthquakes had been reported in regions normally free of such activity, all within hours of the solar event. None were major, but the pattern was unusual. As Rachel dug deeper, cross-referencing data and reaching out to contacts, her phone buzzed with another text. This one wasn't from Daniel or Dr. Riley, but from an unknown number. "Your grandmother was right. We need to talk. They're monitoring communications about this. Be careful who you trust. Meet me at St. Patrick's Cathedral, Lady Chapel, 9 p.m. tonight." Rachel stared at the message, her journalist's instincts firing in all directions. It could be a crank who'd somehow gotten her number. It could be a source with legitimate information, or it could be something else entirely. What she knew for certain was that someone was watching her research into the prophecy, someone who knew about her grandmother, and that alone made this story worth pursuing. She texted back a simple reply, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately, "A friend of Mary's." "Come alone." Rachel sat back in her chair, weighing her options. Every instinct told her to be cautious, but the reporter in her, the part that had earned that Pulitzer nomination by following leads others dismissed, was already reaching for her coat. As she headed for the door, her gaze fell on the framed photo on her desk. Herself at 10 years old, sitting on her grandmother's lap. Mary Petrova had emigrated from Russia in the 1950s, bringing with her a strange mix of Orthodox Christianity and what Rachel's mother had always dismissed as old country superstitions. But there had always been something in Grandma Mary's eyes when she spoke of the end times. A certainty that had frightened and fascinated young Rachel. "When the final pope falls, the clock starts ticking," she would say, always in that hushed, serious tone that differentiated these stories from her usual fairy tales. "The signs will be there for those who know how to read them." Rachel grabbed her recorder, notebook, and press credentials. Whatever was happening, whatever connection existed between her grandmother's prophecies and current events, she would get to the bottom of it with the same critical eye she applied to every investigation. As she left her apartment, the sky outside had taken on a strange reddish tint, unusual for early evening in New York. People on the street had stopped to take pictures with their phones, pointing at the unnatural color spreading across the horizon. "It's just light refraction from pollution," a man in a business suit was explaining to his companion. "Happens all the time." But Rachel noticed the slight tremor in his voice, the same uncertainty she felt herself. Something was different today. Something had changed. As she hailed a taxi to St. Patrick's, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a threshold, stepping from the world of verifiable facts into something murkier, where her grandmother's warnings and modern science were somehow converging. What waited for her at the cathedral? Who was this mysterious contact? And most importantly, was there really a connection between the death of the 112th Pope and the strange events beginning to unfold around the world? Rachel Kovalski, investigative journalist and reluctant granddaughter of a doomsday prophet, was determined to find out. Patrick's Cathedral stood like a Gothic island amid the sleek skyscrapers of Midtown Manhattan. As Rachel approached its massive bronze doors, the evening light filtering through stained glass windows cast multicolored shadows across the stone floor. Despite her secular upbringing, she always felt a certain reverence when entering religious spaces, a respect for the weight of history and belief they contain. The main cathedral was nearly empty at this hour, just a few tourists and late-day worshippers scattered among the pews. Rachel walked purposefully toward the eastern end of the building where the Lady Chapel was located, her footsteps echoing against marble. The smaller chapel, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, was completely deserted when she arrived. Rachel checked her watch, 8:52 p.m. She was early, but that was intentional. In her line of work, she'd learned the value of scoping out meeting locations beforehand. She chose a seat that gave her a clear view of both entrances and waited, her reporter's notebook open on her lap. The silence was so complete, she could hear the faint scratch of her pen as she jotted preliminary notes and questions. At exactly 9 p.m., the sound of the chapel door opening made her look up. A man entered, tall, silver-haired, conservatively dressed in a navy suit. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with the lean build of someone who kept himself in good shape. Nothing about him screamed conspiracy theorist, which put Rachel slightly at ease. "I'm so Kovalski," he said, approaching her pew. Not a question. He knew exactly who she was. "And you are," Rachel replied, not moving from her seat. "Thomas Riley," he extended his hand. "We had email contact earlier today." Rachel shook his hand, surprised. "The professor from Boston College? I wasn't expecting you to be my mysterious contact." "I apologize for the dramatics," Riley said, sliding into the pew beside her, but maintaining a respectful distance. "But after I received your email this morning, certain protocols were activated." "Protocols?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." Riley glanced around the empty chapel before continuing in a lower voice. "Your grandmother didn't just study prophetic traditions, Ms. Kovalski. She was part of a network of academics who monitored them, particularly the Malachi prophecy." "My grandmother was a Russian immigrant who worked as a seamstress," Rachel countered. "She never published academic papers. Mary Petrova published under her maiden name, Sorokina. Her work wasn't widely distributed, mainly appearing in specialized journals with limited circulation. But among those who study apocalyptic literature, her analyses were highly regarded. Rachel tried to process this information. Her grandmother, the woman who had taught her to make pierogies and told her fairy tales, had been living a double life as some kind of academic expert on doomsday prophecies. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why wouldn't she have told our family about this?" "Protection, perhaps," Riley suggested. "Your grandmother understood better than most how certain powerful interests respond to those who take these prophecies seriously, not as supernatural predictions, but as historical patterns that deserve scholarly attention." What powerful interests? Rachel's journalistic instincts were fully engaged now. Various governmental agencies have departments dedicated to monitoring religious extremism. Mrs. Kovalski. When prophecies like Malachi's gain widespread attention, they worry about mass panic, civil unrest, even terror attacks by those who might wish to help along the predicted apocalypse. So the government suppresses research into religious prophecies? Rachel couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. That seems like overkill. Not suppression exactly, Riley corrected. More like containment, steering the public discourse away from interpretations that might cause alarm. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small USB drive, placing it on the pew between them. "This contains your grandmother's complete works on the Malachi prophecy, including her final analysis, completed just weeks before her death. She predicted not just the timing, but the specific sequence of events that would follow the death of the 112th Pope." Rachel made no move to take the drive. "Why give this to me? Why now?" "Because Mary believed you would be the one to bring the truth to light when the time came. She told me, my granddaughter has the right combination of skepticism and openness. She'll question everything, but she'll follow the evidence wherever it leads." Despite herself, Rachel felt a pang of emotion at hearing her grandmother's words quoted back to her. It sounded like Mary, that balance of doubt and faith she had always tried to instill in her granddaughter. "What truth are we talking about exactly?" Rachel asked, picking up the drive and slipping it into her pocket. "That's what you need to discover," Riley said. "I'm just a messenger. Mary was the one with the vision." "Vision?" Rachel frowned. "You're making my grandmother sound like a psychic." "Not psychic," Riley shook his head. "Just extraordinarily perceptive. She recognized patterns others missed. Connections between seemingly unrelated events. The solar activity today, for instance. Mary predicted an unprecedented coronal mass ejection would mark the beginning of the sequence." Rachel thought of the classified Noe briefing with its references to unprecedented magnitude and unusual characteristics. It could be coincidence, of course. Or Riley could be retrofitting his claims to match current events. "Professor," she said carefully, "I'm a journalist. I deal in verifiable facts. If you're suggesting there's a story here, one backed by evidence, not supernatural claims, then I'm interested. But I need more than a USB drive and claims about my grandmother's secret scholarly life." "Fair enough," Riley nodded. Check the drive, verify its contents. Then meet me tomorrow at the Morgan Library at noon. I'll bring documentation that will satisfy your professional standards." He stood to leave, then paused, looking down at her with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "One more thing, Ms. Kovalski. Your editor, Daniel Park? Be careful what you share with him." Rachel stiffened. "Excuse me? Look into his background. When he joined your paper, where he came from. Just verify, as any good journalist would." Before she could respond, Riley was walking away, his footsteps echoing through the chapel. The heavy door closed behind him, leaving Rachel alone with her thoughts and a USB drive burning a hole in her pocket. Back in her apartment, Rachel plugged the drive into her laptop, half expecting it to contain nothing but religious ramblings or, worse, malware. Instead, she found a meticulously organized collection of academic papers, research notes, correspondence, and what appeared to be personal journals, all authored by Mary Sorokina, the woman Rachel had known only as Grandma Mary. The files were dated from the 1960s through 2015, the year of her grandmother's death. The most recent was a document titled Final Analysis, Sequence Following Petrus Romanus. Rachel opened it, her skepticism battling with growing curiosity. The document began with a scholarly analysis of the Malachi prophecy's historical context and transmission, much of which Rachel had already uncovered in her own research. But then it moved into territory she hadn't seen before, a detailed examination of historical patterns surrounding major religious transitions and their correlation with natural phenomena. According to Mary's analysis, major shifts in religious leadership throughout history had often coincided with unusual astronomical, geological, or meteorological events. Not because of supernatural causation, she was careful to note, but because human societies tended to undergo periodic systemic stress that affected multiple domains simultaneously: political, religious, and environmental. The death of the 112th Pope, Mary argued, would come at a moment when multiple systems were reaching critical instability points. She predicted a specific sequence: 1. Unprecedented solar activity affecting global communications. 2. Seismic events in regions historically free of such activity. 3. Rapid atmospheric changes leading to unusual weather patterns. 4. Emergence of a charismatic figure offering technological solutions. 5. Governmental attempts to control information about these events. Rachel checked the document's creation date, November 3, 2015, just 2 weeks before her grandmother's death. 3 months later, the Pope Mary had identified as the 112th since Malachi's prophecy had been elected. And now, years later, he had died, and the sequence she'd predicted seemed to be unfolding. It was compelling, but the rational part of Rachel's mind still sought alternative explanations. Solar flares happened regularly. Earthquakes occurred in unexpected places. Weather patterns were increasingly unpredictable due to climate change. A charismatic tech leader offering solutions was hardly unusual in the modern world, and governments always tried to control information flow during crises. Yet the precision of it all, the exact sequence following her grandmother's predictions, was becoming difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Rachel turned to the other files on the drive, looking for more context. Among them was a folder labeled Monitor Network, containing correspondence between Mary and other academics around the world who had been tracking similar patterns. One name caught her eye: Dr. Amara Okafor, Department of Geological Sciences, MIT. According to the emails, Okafor had been developing models predicting unusual seismic activity patterns based on solar-terrestrial interactions, precisely the connection that had surprised Rachel in the leaked NOAA briefing. Rachel opened a new browser window and searched for Dr. Okafor. The professor was still at MIT, with an impressive list of publications on planetary geophysics. If anyone could verify whether the earthquake activity following the solar flare was truly anomalous, it would be her. She drafted a quick email, identifying herself as both a journalist working on a story about potential solar-terrestrial connections and as Mary Petrova's granddaughter. The latter was a calculated risk. If Riley was telling the truth, it might open doors. If not, she'd just sound like another conspiracy theorist. After sending the email, Rachel turned her attention to Riley's parting comment about her editor. She'd worked with Daniel Park for 3 years and considered him a mentor and friend. The suggestion that he might not be trustworthy felt like a personal affront. Nevertheless, professional curiosity compelled her to do a quick background check. Daniel had come to the New York Daily from the Washington Post, where he'd been a senior editor for their investigative team. Before that, he'd worked at several smaller publications, building a solid reputation for hard-hitting journalism. Nothing seemed unusual until Rachel dug into the period between his time at the Post and joining the Daily. There was a gap of approximately 7 months that his official bio glossed over as consulting work. Odd, but not necessarily suspicious. Many journalists did consulting stints between major positions. She was about to close that line of inquiry when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Mrs. Kovalski? This is Dr. Brun. This is Sir Amara Okafor. I just received your email." Rachel sat up straighter, surprised by the immediate response. "Dr. Okafor, thank you for calling. I didn't expect to hear from you so quickly. When I saw Mary Petrova's name, I made an exception to my usual response time," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight Nigerian accent. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. Her interdisciplinary approach to pattern recognition was ahead of her time." "So you really did work with her?" Rachel asked, still trying to reconcile this academic side of her grandmother with the woman she'd known. "Not directly, but we corresponded extensively. Her insights into historical patterns helped shape my research into anomalous seismic events." There was a pause. "If you're looking into the current situation, You should know that what we're seeing is unprecedented in my field of study." Rachel felt a chill. "The earthquakes following the solar flare?" "Yes. We've recorded 17 distinct seismic events in the past 12 hours, all in regions with no historical record of such activity. My colleagues are scrambling to explain it through conventional models, but—" Dr. Okafor's voice trailed off. "But," Rachel prompted, "but it matches the pattern your grandmother predicted. I've been watching for it since the Pope's death was announced this morning. I didn't expect it to manifest so quickly or so precisely." Another chill ran through Rachel. "Dr. Okafor, I'd like to meet with you. I'm trying to understand what's happening. Separate fact from speculation." "I'm actually in New York for a conference," the scientist replied. "I could meet you tomorrow morning. Say 10 a.m. at the MIT Alumni Club near Bryant Park?" "I'll be there," Rachel agreed, making a note in her calendar. "And thank you for taking this seriously." "Ms. Kovalski, no, Dr. Okafor said, her tone grave. "I take empirical evidence seriously. And right now, the evidence suggests we're witnessing something that defies conventional explanation. Whether that aligns with a medieval prophecy or not is less important to me than understanding the actual mechanisms at work." After ending the call, Rachel sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything she'd learned. Her grandmother's secret academic life, the seemingly accurate predictions, the unusual solar and seismic activity, Riley's warning about Daniel. None of it fit neatly into her understanding of the world, yet all of it demanded investigation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Just got word of unusual seismic readings along eastern seaboard. Need you on this ASAP. Can you meet our science correspondent tomorrow? He's got sources inside USGS." Before she could respond, another text came through. "Actually, let's discuss in person. Breakfast at the usual place, 8 a.m. Rachel stared at the messages, Riley's warning echoing in her mind. Was it just coincidence that Daniel wanted to discuss exactly what she was investigating? Or was something else at play? She set her phone down and returned to her grandmother's files, determined to understand as much as possible before tomorrow's meetings. Whether this was the beginning of an apocalyptic sequence or simply an unusual convergence of natural phenomena, Rachel Kovalski was now in the story, and she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth, whatever it might be. As she scrolled through documents, the sky outside her window flashed with unusual light, too brief to be lightning, too intense to be a reflection. Rachel moved to the window and looked out at the New York skyline. Nothing seemed amiss, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the world today. The prophecy had named the final pope Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, though scholars had long debated whether that referred to his papal name, his birth name, or merely his characteristics. The recently deceased pontiff didn't obviously fit the description, yet he had been the 112th since the prophecy was created. What if the prophecy wasn't about the Pope himself, but about what followed his death? What if the real story wasn't about religious prediction, but about patterns in complex systems that medieval minds had interpreted through the lens of spirituality? Rachel turned back to her laptop with renewed determination. If there was a story here, and her instincts told her there was, she would find it. Not as Mary Petrova's granddaughter or as a believer in prophecies, but as the investigative journalist she had trained to be. Someone who followed evidence wherever it led, no matter how unexpected the destination. The diner on Lexington Avenue had been Rachel and Daniel's go-to breakfast spot for years. A cramped, old-fashioned place with vinyl booths and waitresses who knew their orders by heart. Rachel arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a seat with a view of the entrance, in the street beyond. Old journalist habits. The morning news played on a small TV behind the counter. The Pope's death still dominated the headlines, but now shared space with reports of the unusual solar activity and its effects on power grids and communication systems worldwide. A meteorologist was explaining how the aurora borealis might be visible as far south as Florida tonight, an unprecedented occurrence. Unprecedented seemed to be the word of the day. Rachel sipped her coffee and reviewed her notes. She had spent much of the night combing through her grandmother's files, focusing on the claimed correlations between astronomical events and geological disturbances. According to Mary's research, the relationship wasn't merely coincidental, but causal, though through mechanisms modern science had yet to fully document. More intriguing were the references to classified research from the 1960s, when both American and Soviet scientists had apparently observed connections between solar activity and subtle changes in Earth's gravitational field. This research had been abandoned, or more accurately, removed from public view, following a series of anomalous events in 1967 that Mary's notes referred to only as the Tunguska confirmation. The bell above the diner door chimed. Daniel Park entered, scanning the room until he spotted Rachel. At 45, Daniel was at the peak of his career, a respected editor with 2 Pulitzers to his name, known for his unflinching pursuit of truth and his mentorship of young journalists. Rachel had trusted him implicitly, until now. "Morning, Kovalski," he said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "Started without me, I see." "Just caffeine," she replied, closing her notebook. "You're looking harried." Daniel ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "It's been a long night. The solar flare knocked out 3 satellites and disrupted power to half the eastern seaboard. The science team has been working nonstop." The waitress appeared, coffee pot in hand. "The usual, Mr. Park, please, Doris, and maybe an extra shot of espresso." As the waitress walked away, Daniel leaned forward. "So about this story, the USGS is recording seismic activity in places that have never had earthquakes before. Nothing major yet, 3.2 at most, but the pattern is bizarre. I want you to work with Jensen from the science desk. He's got contacts at both USGS and NASA." Rachel nodded, keeping her expression neutral. What's the angle? Environmental? Political? That's what we need to figure out." Daniel stirred cream into his coffee. "The government's being unusually tight-lipped. My sources say there's been a classified briefing for select members of Congress, but no one's talking about what was discussed." "A cover-up?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Maybe. Or just an abundance of caution until they understand what's happening." Daniel took a sip of his coffee. "Either way, it's a story with potential, especially given the timing." "The Pope," Rachel said, watching Daniel's reaction carefully. Something flickered across his face. So brief she might have missed it if she hadn't been looking for it. "Exactly. People are already drawing connections to that old prophecy. Malachi's thing about the 112 popes. Social media is lighting up with doomsday talk." "And what do you think about those connections?" Rachel asked, her tone deliberately casual. Daniel gave a dismissive wave. "Religious superstition meets confirmation bias, but it's creating a public reaction we need to cover. People are panic buying again, like early COVID days. Gas stations running dry, grocery shelves emptying." Doris returned with their food, whole wheat toast and egg whites for Daniel, blueberry pancakes for Rachel. As she set the plates down, the TV behind the counter switched to a breaking news alert. The volume was too low to hear, but the caption read, "Unexpected earthquake swarm in Midwest. Scientists puzzled." Both journalists turned to look at the screen, watching footage of minor damage in Michigan, a state not known for seismic activity. "Like I said," Daniel murmured, "unprecedented." Rachel turned back to him. "I've actually been looking into this already. The connection between the solar activity and these earthquakes." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Have you now? Find anything interesting?" This was the moment to test Riley's warning. Rachel chose her words carefully. "I've been in contact with a geophysicist at MIT who studies solar terrestrial interactions. She believes there might be a causal relationship between the CME and these unusual seismic events." "Sounds promising," Daniel nodded. "What's the scientist's name? I'll have Jensen reach out to corroborate." "Dr. Amara Okafor," Rachel said, watching Daniel's reaction. "I'm meeting with her later this morning." There it was again, that almost imperceptible change in his expression. Recognition? Concern? Rachel couldn't quite place it, but something was definitely there. "Good initiative," Daniel said after a beat too long. "Though I'd prefer you coordinate with Jensen before conducting interviews. We need a unified approach on this one." "Of course," Rachel agreed, though she had no intention of doing so. "By the way, I've been meaning to ask you about your time between the post and joining us. Your bio mentions consulting work?" The question was abrupt, deliberately so. Rachel watched as Daniel's hand paused midway to his coffee cup. "Curious about career transitions suddenly?" he asked lightly, but his eyes had hardened. "It was nothing exciting. Media strategy for a tech firm and some freelance editing." "Why?" "Just filling in gaps," Rachel shrugged. "I'm updating my LinkedIn network." Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then glanced at his watch. "We should wrap this up. I've got an editorial meeting at 9, and you should connect with Jensen before your MIT interview." They finished their breakfast with casual conversation about office politics and the upcoming city elections, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between them. By the time they stepped outside onto the crowded sidewalk, Rachel was certain of one thing. Thomas Riley's warning about Daniel had merit. "Keep me updated on what Okafor tells you," Daniel said as they prepared to head in opposite directions. "And Rachel, be careful with speculation on this story. Stick to verified facts." "Always do," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As she watched him walk away, Rachel pulled out her phone and sent a text to a contact she hadn't reached out to in years. Josh Pelletier, a hacker turned security consultant who had helped her on a story about data privacy violations. "Need background check on someone, off the books. Professional, not personal. Interested?" His reply came almost immediately. "For you, always. Details via secure channel?" Rachel confirmed and pocketed her phone, heading toward Bryant Park for her meeting with Dr. Okafor. Whatever Daniel wasn't telling her, she would find out. But first, she needed to understand the science behind what was happening. The MIT club near Bryant Park occupied the upper floors of a dignified pre-war building. Its wood-paneled library, where Rachel waited for Dr. Okafor, exuded old-world academic prestige, a sharp contrast to the cutting-edge research conducted by its members. Rachel had arrived early again, using the time to review news updates on her phone. The earthquake swarm in Michigan had been joined by similar events in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of Ontario, all areas with no significant seismic history. Social media was awash with theories ranging from scientific, changing magnetic fields affecting tectonic stability, to conspiratorial, secret government weapons testing, to apocalyptic, the end times foretold by various prophecies, including Malachi's. "Ms. Kovalski?" Rachel looked up to see a woman in her 50s with close-cropped silver hair and striking features, dressed in a tailored pantsuit that managed to look both professional and artistic. "Dr. Okafor," Rachel stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting me. Please call me Amara," the scientist said, her handshake firm. "I feel as though I know you already through Mary's stories." They settled into comfortable leather armchairs in a quiet corner of the library. A waiter appeared silently to take their drink orders. Tea for Amara, more coffee for Rachel. "I must admit," Amara began once they were alone, "I've been anticipating this meeting for years, though I didn't know exactly when it would come." "I'm not sure I understand," Rachel said cautiously. Amara's expression was both serious and compassionate. "Your grandmother told me that when the time came, when the sequence she had identified began to manifest, you would seek answers. She said you would come to those of us in her network, driven by your journalist's instinct for truth." Rachel felt a mix of emotions, discomfort at being apparently predictable, irritation at having been discussed without her knowledge, and a reluctant curiosity about what else her grandmother might have said about her. "Dr. Okafor, Amara," she corrected herself. "I'm here primarily as a journalist investigating unusual seismic activity following a major solar event. While I'm certainly interested in my grandmother's research, I'm not on some predestined quest." Amara smiled slightly. "Mary said you'd say something like that too. She admired your skepticism, you know. Called it your scientific anchor in a world too easily swept away by belief." Despite herself, Rachel felt touched by this insight into her grandmother's thoughts. "You said the current seismic pattern matches what she predicted. Can you elaborate on that?" Amara nodded, her expression becoming more professional. "Mary's hypothesis, and I stress it was a scientific hypothesis, not a mystical prophecy, was that certain solar events could trigger a cascade of effects in Earth's geomagnetic field. These changes, in turn, could induce stress in the crystalline structures of bedrock in regions not typically associated with fault lines, creating earthquakes where they shouldn't occur," Rachel concluded. "Precisely. Conventional geophysics acknowledges some relationship between solar activity and Earth's magnetic field, but not the specific mechanisms Mary proposed. Her models suggested that under certain conditions that appear to be manifesting now, the effect could be significantly more pronounced than mainstream science recognizes. And these conditions coincide with the death of someone identified in a medieval prophecy as the 112th Pope," Rachel said, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "That seems like quite a coincidence." "Does it?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "Or is it possible that whoever created the Malachi prophecy observed similar patterns in their own time and interpreted them through a religious lens? Ancient peoples were astute observers of natural phenomena, even if they explained those observations through frameworks we now consider unscientific. It was a perspective Rachel hadn't considered, that the prophecy might be based on observation rather than supernatural revelation. It made a certain logical sense, though it still didn't explain the precise timing. So you're suggesting that the author of the prophecy noted a correlation between papal transitions and natural phenomena and extrapolated a pattern? Rachel asked. It's one possibility, Amara acknowledged. Another is that certain astronomical cycles, ones that might trigger these solar terrestrial effects, were better understood by ancient scientists than we give them credit for. The medieval mind didn't separate astronomy from astrology or natural philosophy from theology as we do today. Their drinks arrived, giving Rachel a moment to process this information. When the waiter had gone, she leaned forward. Let's focus on what's happening now. How unusual are these earthquakes really? And what's next, according to my grandmother's model? Amara took a sip of her tea before answering. To answer your first question, completely unprecedented in the historical record. We've recorded 23 distinct seismic events in the past 24 hours, all in regions that have been geologically stable for millions of years. She pulled a tablet from her bag and brought up a map showing the locations of the recent earthquakes, clustered primarily around the Great Lakes region, but with others scattered across normally stable parts of North America and Europe. As for what's next, she continued, Mary's model predicted a specific progression. First, communications disruptions due to electromagnetic interference, then seismic events in stable regions, followed by atmospheric anomalies resulting from the interaction between changed magnetic fields and air circulation patterns. Atmospheric anomalies? Like what? Unusual weather formations, rapid pressure changes, possibly visible phenomena in the upper atmosphere beyond the typical aurora effects. As if on cue, Rachel's phone buzzed with a news alert. Mysterious atmospheric phenomenon reported over Atlantic. Airlines diverting flights. She showed the screen to Amara, who nodded grimly. It's accelerating faster than I anticipated. Mary's model suggested days between stages, but we're seeing hours. What comes after the atmospheric effects? Rachel asked, feeling a chill despite the room's comfortable temperature. That's where the science becomes more speculative, Amara admitted. Mary's notes indicated potential gravitational anomalies, though the mechanism for this wasn't clear. And after that, she hesitated. After that? Rachel prompted. After that, her notes become cryptic. She referred to something called the convergence, but never defined it explicitly. She did, however, suggest it would be visible in the sky, observable globally. Rachel thought of her grandmother's warnings from childhood. Signs in the heavens, Rachushka. When they come, everyone will see, but few will understand. And the government? Rachel asked. In your opinion, do they understand what's happening? Amara's expression turned cautious. Certain agencies have been monitoring these patterns for decades. My colleagues and I have occasionally been consulted, though always through channels that maintain plausible deniability. They know more than they're acknowledging publicly. Why the secrecy? Fear of panic, most likely. Imagine the public reaction if the government announced that unprecedented natural phenomena were occurring with no clear explanation or containment strategy. Rachel thought of Daniel's comments about people panic buying supplies, but keeping people in the dark could be just as dangerous. If these events escalate, which is precisely why your grandmother believed the truth needed to come to light, Amara interrupted. Not to cause panic, but to prepare. Knowledge is preferable to ignorance, especially when facing the unknown. And you believe I'm supposed to be the messenger? Rachel couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. I believe you're a respected journalist with the platform and credibility to present this information responsibly, Amara replied diplomatically. Whether that fulfills your grandmother's expectations is secondary to the practical need for accurate reporting on what's happening. It was a fair point. Whatever her grandmother's intentions, Rachel had a professional responsibility to investigate and report on significant events, particularly those potentially being obscured by government agencies. I'm meeting Professor Riley at the Morgan Library at noon, Rachel said, checking the time on her phone. He mentioned documentation that might corroborate some of these claims. Thomas is thorough, Amara nodded. His historical perspective complements my scientific approach. Between us, you should get a reasonably complete picture, or as complete as anyone has right now. As they prepared to conclude their meeting, Rachel had one more question. Amara, what do you personally believe is happening? Setting aside scientific caution and academic hedging, what's your gut telling you? The geophysicist was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she said, "I believe we're witnessing a rare convergence of natural cycles, astronomical, geological, atmospheric, that occurs perhaps once every several thousand years. The ancients may have observed it before and recorded it in various ways, including prophecies like Malachi's. And the implications? Significant disruption to our modern infrastructure, certainly. Beyond that," Amara shrugged slightly, "science doesn't like to speculate beyond available data. But if pressed, I'd say we're approaching a threshold of some kind, a transition point in Earth's complex systems that we don't yet fully understand." It wasn't exactly apocalyptic, but it wasn't reassuring either. Rachel thanked Amara for her time, arranging to stay in contact as events developed. As she left the MIT club and headed toward Madison Avenue, Rachel's phone buzzed again, a text from Josh regarding Daniel. "Found something interesting." Park's consulting period included 3 months at a DARPA-adjacent think tank called Horizon Analytics. They specialize in information management during crisis events, essentially propaganda experts for national security situations. More digging needed, but thought you should know ASAP. Rachel stopped walking, pedestrians flowing around her like a human river. Daniel had worked for a government-affiliated organization specializing in controlling information during crises, and he had never mentioned it despite their years of working together. The pieces were starting to connect in troubling ways. Her grandmother's research into patterns others dismissed. Government agencies monitoring those same patterns. Daniel's mysterious consulting work. The current media narrative downplaying the unprecedented nature of these events. What had Mary written in her final analysis? Emergence of a charismatic figure offering technological solutions, followed by governmental attempts to control information about these events. Rachel checked the time. She had just under an hour before meeting Riley at the Morgan Library. Enough time to make a quick detour to the New York Daily's archives. If Daniel had been placed at the newspaper for a specific purpose, monitoring certain types of stories perhaps, there might be evidence in the pattern of his editorial decisions over the years. As she hailed a taxi, the sky above Manhattan seemed to shimmer strangely, like heat waves on a summer road. But it was only April, and the air was cool. Several people on the sidewalk had stopped to point and take pictures with their phones. "Weird light show, huh?" the taxi driver commented as Rachel slid into the back seat. "They're saying it's from that solar flare, but I've never seen anything like it." "Neither has anyone else," Rachel replied quietly. "That's what worries me." "Where to, miss?" Rachel gave him the address of the newspaper, her mind already racing ahead. Whatever was happening, whatever convergence of natural cycles or fulfillment of ancient prophecies or government cover-up was unfolding, she was now firmly on the trail. And like any good investigative journalist, she would follow it wherever it led, no matter how strange or unsettling the destination. The archives of the New York Daily occupied a climate-controlled room in the basement of their Midtown office building. It was old school in the best way. Physical copies of every issue published since the paper's founding in 1923, along with digitized versions accessible through terminals inside the room. Unlike the bustling newsroom upstairs, the archives had a hushed, library-like atmosphere that Rachel had always appreciated. "Morning, Mitz." "It's Kina Samar Kovalski," said Harold, the elderly archivist who had supervised this domain for over 30 years. "Didn't expect to see you down here today." "Last-minute research," Rachel replied with a smile. "I need to check some editorial decisions over the past few years." Harold raised bushy eyebrows. "Editorial history? That's a new one. Any particular section or topic?" Rachel considered her approach. Going directly after Daniel's editorial decisions might raise flags, especially if he had people watching for exactly this kind of investigation. "I'm looking at how we've covered scientific anomalies and unexplained phenomena over the past 5 years," she said, "particularly comparing our approach to other major publications." It wasn't entirely a lie. If Daniel had been placed at the paper to monitor or suppress certain types of stories, those patterns would be evident in how the Daily covered unusual scientific events compared to their competitors. "Terminal 3 is free," Harold said, gesturing toward the back of the room. "The comparative press database was updated last week, so you should have current information for most major publications." Rachel thanked him and made her way to the terminal, logging in with her press credentials. First, she pulled up all articles related to unexplained scientific phenomena that the Daily had published since Daniel joined as an editor 3 years ago. She then ran the same search for comparable periods at the Washington Post, New York Times, and Chicago Tribune. The pattern emerged quickly. While other publications had run in-depth investigative pieces on unexplained atmospheric phenomena, unusual astronomical observations, and anomalous seismic events, the Daily had consistently downplayed such stories, relegating them to small mentions in the science section or framing them in ways that emphasize conventional explanations. More telling were the stories they hadn't covered at all. Rachel cross-referenced with wire service reports and found dozens of potentially newsworthy incidents that other papers had considered significant, but that never appeared in the Daily's pages. She refined her search, looking specifically at editorial decisions where Daniel's fingerprints would be most visible. The pattern became even clearer. Stories about unusual natural phenomena or unexplained events that initially had been assigned significant resources were often reduced in scope or emphasis after editorial review. Rachel's own investigative pieces had mostly focused on political corruption and corporate malfeasance, areas where she'd been given free rein. But she recalled one story from about a year ago, a piece about unusual electromagnetic anomalies affecting navigation systems in parts of the Midwest, that Daniel had suggested she deprioritize in favor of a municipal contract scandal. At the time, she hadn't questioned his judgment. Now, with growing unease, she searched for that specific story idea in the system and found that after she dropped it, it had been assigned to a junior reporter who produced a small, technically dense piece that ran on page 17. The competing coverage in other publications had been more prominent and had raised questions about possible government research projects that might be causing the anomalies. Rachel sat back in her chair, processing what she was seeing. It wasn't smoking gun evidence of a conspiracy, but it did suggest a consistent editorial policy of minimizing attention to exactly the kinds of phenomena that were currently manifesting worldwide. She was about to dig deeper when her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Archives aren't secure. Meeting moved to Putnam's Rare Books on Madison and 46th. Come now. Rachel stared at the message. How did Riley know she was in the archives? Was she being watched? And if so, by whom? She logged out of the terminal, making sure to clear her search history, and thanked Harold on her way out. Rather than taking the elevator up to the newsroom, where she might encounter Daniel or other editors, she exited through the building's side entrance. Outside, the strange atmospheric shimmering had intensified. The sky above Manhattan had taken on an opalescent quality, like mother of pearl, with subtle shifts in color that seemed to follow no natural pattern. Pedestrians were stopping to take photos or simply stare upward. A street preacher near the corner had attracted a small crowd as he proclaimed the end times with renewed vigor. "The signs are here," he shouted, pointing skyward. "The prophecies are fulfilled. The final pope has fallen, and now comes judgment." Rachel watched as reactions among the crowd ranged from fearful agreement to eye-rolling dismissal. Yet even the skeptics couldn't help glancing nervously at the strange sky. She hailed a taxi and directed it to Madison and 46th Street. Along the way, she noticed that traffic was unusually light for midday in Manhattan. Electronic billboards in Times Square flickered with intermittent disruptions. And at one intersection, police were manually directing traffic because the signals had failed. Putnam's Rare Books occupied the ground floor of a narrow building wedged between more modern structures. Its windows displayed leather-bound volumes and antiquarian maps behind protective glass. A small bell jingled as Rachel pushed open the door, stepping from the noise and tension of the street into the hushed, book-scented interior. The shop was empty except for an elderly man behind the counter, who looked up from a massive ledger as she entered. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice matching the shop's atmosphere. Quiet, dignified, slightly archaic. "I'm looking for Professor Riley," Rachel replied. The man nodded and gestured toward a narrow staircase at the back of the shop. "Second floor, first door on your right. He's expecting you." Rachel climbed the worn wooden steps, noticing that the strange light from outside was filtering through a small stained glass window on the landing, creating prismatic patterns on the wall that seemed to move independently of any breeze or vibration. The door on the right was ajar. She knocked lightly before pushing it open to reveal a small reading room furnished with a round table, several comfortable chairs, and bookshelves lining every wall. Thomas Riley was seated at the table, along with another man Rachel didn't recognize. Younger, perhaps in his 30s, with thick glasses and a nervous energy as he manipulated something on a tablet. Ms. Kovalski," Riley rose to greet her. "Thank you for adjusting to our change in venue. This is Simon Chen, Dr. Okafor's former graduate student and our technology specialist. "How did you know I was in the archives?" Rachel asked, shaking hands with both men, but remaining standing. "We've been monitoring communications related to certain keywords," Simon answered, glancing at Riley as if seeking permission to elaborate. "When you logged into the comparative press database and entered search terms related to anomalous phenomena, it triggered an alert." "You're hacking newspaper databases?" Rachel's journalistic alarm bells rang loudly. "Not hacking," Simon corrected quickly. "We have legitimate access. Several members of our network are affiliated with media organizations, academic institutions, and government agencies. We use these connections to track patterns of information control." "Which is precisely what you were investigating at the Daily's archives," Riley added, gesturing for Rachel to take a seat. "Your discovery of the systematic suppression of certain types of stories confirms what we've been documenting for years." Rachel remained standing. "And what exactly is we?" "You've hinted at some kind of network or organization, but you've been deliberately vague about its nature and purpose." Riley exchanged a glance with Simon, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "We don't have a formal name or structure that would make us too easy to monitor or infiltrate. We're simply a network of individuals across various fields who recognize the patterns your grandmother documented and committed ourselves to tracking them." "With what goal?" Rachel pressed. "Initially understanding," Riley replied. "As the patterns became clearer, preparation. And now that the sequence is manifesting, disclosure." "You want to go public with all of this," Rachel surmised. "The prophecy, the anomalies, the government suppression." "We want the truth to be known," Riley corrected. "Not to create panic, but to prevent the kind of uninformed fear that flourishes in information vacuums. People deserve to know what's happening, even if the full explanation remains elusive." Rachel finally took a seat, her journalistic instincts warring with her personal skepticism. "And you think I'm the person to break this story? Based on what? My grandmother's belief in me? Some notion of destiny?" "Based on your proven integrity as a journalist," Riley countered. "Your record of exposing corruption and speaking truth to power. And yes, your connection to Mary, who understood these patterns better than anyone." He placed a leather portfolio on the table between them. "The documentation I promised you, historical records of similar event sequences throughout recorded history, scientific data on the current anomalies, and evidence of coordinated information suppression by government agencies and media organizations, including your own." Rachel opened the portfolio and began examining its contents. The documents were impressively thorough. Scientific papers, declassified government memos, comparative media analyses, historical records dating back centuries, all pointing to a pattern of periodic, global-scale disruptions that followed a specific sequence and coincided with major transitions in religious or political power. Most disturbing were the recent classified directives, clearly leaked from inside various agencies, instructing how information about the current anomalies should be managed in public discourse. One memo from the Department of Homeland Security, dated just 2 days ago, explicitly referenced the Maliki contingency and outlined a strategy for narrative containment. "This is..." Rachel trailed off, unsure how to process what she was seeing. "Overwhelming, I know," Riley said sympathetically. "It took me years to accept the implications of these patterns, and I'm a scholar of apocalyptic literature. For someone with your empirical mindset, it must be even more difficult." Rachel looked up from the documents. "Let's say I accept that these patterns are real, that they've occurred periodically throughout history, and that governments are actively suppressing information about what's happening now. What exactly do you think is occurring? What's the underlying cause?" Simon cleared his throat. "That's where scientific consensus becomes challenging. The data suggests a complex interaction between astronomical cycles, Earth's geomagnetic field, and various geological and atmospheric systems. But the precise mechanism linking these phenomena remains theoretical. Some members of our network lean toward purely scientific explanations," Riley added. "Others, including many religious scholars, see these patterns as evidence of divine design. Your grandmother maintained a position somewhere in between, acknowledging both the empirical data and the possibility of meaning beyond what science can currently measure." Rachel was about to press for more specific explanations when Simon's tablet emitted a sharp alert. He grabbed it, his eyes widening as he read whatever had appeared on the screen. "New seismic events," he reported. "Simultaneous 4.6 magnitude earthquakes at multiple locations along the East Coast. New York, Boston, D.C., Charleston. All precisely at the same moment, all at the same depth. That's impossible, Rachel said. Earthquakes don't synchronize like that. And yet, Riley said grimly, as the floor beneath them began to tremble. The vibration was subtle at first. Books rattling slightly on shelves, the chandelier overhead swaying almost imperceptibly. Then it intensified, becoming impossible to ignore. The stained glass window on the landing began to emit an eerie hum as the vibrations reached its resonant frequency. Under the table, Simon urged, already moving. Standard earthquake protocol. The three of them ducked beneath the heavy wooden table as the shaking increased. Books tumbled from shelves, and somewhere in the shop below, glass shattered. Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket. An emergency alert, no doubt, but she couldn't safely retrieve it while bracing herself against the tremors. The quake lasted only about 30 seconds, but it felt much longer. When the shaking finally subsided, they cautiously emerged from under the table to survey the damage. The room was in disarray but structurally intact. Rachel pulled out her phone to check the emergency alert and found instead a text from Daniel. "Where are you? All hands on deck for earthquake coverage. Need you back at the office ASAP." Before she could respond, her phone rang. Josh Pelletier, her hacker contact. "Tell me you're okay," he said when she answered, skipping any greeting. "I'm fine," Rachel assured him. "In a bookshop on Madison." "What's happening? Beyond synchronized earthquakes in cities with no fault lines? A whole lot of weird." Josh's voice was tense, uncharacteristic for his usually laid-back demeanor. "I've been digging into that DARPA think tank your editor worked for, and Rachel, it gets deep. Horizon Analytics isn't just about information management. They're part of something called Project Cassandra. Named after the Greek prophet no one believed," Rachel noted, her journalistic mind automatically making connections. "Exactly. From what I can piece together, it's a multi-agency initiative that's been monitoring these exact types of anomalies for decades. Your editor wasn't just doing some consulting gig. He was being trained as what they call an information supervisor, someone embedded in media organizations to control the narrative about these events when they eventually manifested." Rachel caught Riley's eye, seeing confirmation of what Josh was telling her. "And Horizon Analytics. What's their role? They're the interface between the scientific side of Project Cassandra and the public-facing operation. They develop the messaging strategies, identify which facts to emphasize and which to bury, provide plausible alternate explanations for anomalous events. Propaganda specialists," Rachel summarized. "High-level, sophisticated propaganda, but yeah," Josh agreed. "And here's where it gets really interesting. Horizon's funding comes primarily from a private foundation called the Institute for Future Stability. Guess who's on their board?" "I couldn't possibly," Rachel said dryly. "Ezra Hammond, tech billionaire, media conglomerate owner, and apparently apocalypse manager." The name struck Rachel like a physical blow. Ezra Hammond, founder of Hammond Technologies, one of the world's largest tech companies, known for cutting-edge work in artificial intelligence and surveillance systems. And the fourth stage in her grandmother's predicted sequence, emergence of a charismatic figure offering technological solutions. "I need to go, Josh," she said abruptly, "but keep digging. And be careful. It sounds like these people have resources." After ending the call, she turned to Riley and Simon. "We need to leave. Now. The pieces are falling into place, and I think I know what comes next." "Hammond," Riley nodded, already gathering the scattered documents. "Mary predicted he would emerge as a central figure when the information containment strategy began to fail." "What do you know about him?" Rachel asked, helping to collect papers. "Officially one of the world's most successful tech entrepreneurs and philanthropists," Simon replied. "Unofficially the architect of a global surveillance infrastructure that would make Orwell's Big Brother look amateur. His companies provide the backbone for most government monitoring systems, social media platforms, and smart city technologies." "And he has a plan for what's happening?" Rachel pressed. "According to our sources," Riley said, "Hammond has been preparing for these events for years. He's built a network of what he calls stabilization centers, hardened facilities equipped with advanced technology supposedly designed to counteract the anomalies." "But you don't believe that's their real purpose," Rachel guessed. "We believe Hammond sees these events as an opportunity," Riley confirmed grimly. "A chance to implement a technological control system beyond anything currently possible under normal social and political constraints." The shop owner appeared in the doorway, looking shaken but unharmed. "Gentlemen, Miss Kovalski, are you all right?" That was quite a tremor. "We're fine, Mr. Putnam," Riley assured him. "How is the shop?" Some broken glass, books to reshelve, but the building is sound. He glanced at the window where the strange opalescent light had intensified, though I dare say the earthquake is the least of our concerns. Have you seen the sky? They moved to the window, looking out onto Madison Avenue. The atmospheric shimmer had transformed into something more defined, undulating patterns of light that resembled auroras, but moved with an almost deliberate quality. Pedestrians had stopped in their tracks, many filming with their phones, others pointing and talking animatedly. And in the distance, barely visible between the skyscrapers, a new phenomenon was taking shape. A circular distortion in the air, like heat waves, but more structured, forming what appeared to be a slowly rotating disk of light. The convergence, Simon whispered. It's happening faster than any of us predicted. Rachel's phone buzzed again. Multiple messages and missed calls from Daniel, increasingly urgent in tone. The most recent simply read, Hammond making announcement at 3 p.m. All national networks carrying it. This is not a request, Rachel. Where are you? She showed the message to Riley, who checked his watch. 2 hours. Not much time. For what? Rachel asked. For you to decide what kind of story you're going to tell, Riley replied. Hammond will present his version. Technological salvation from mysterious natural phenomena, most likely. The government and mainstream media will amplify his message. The question is, will you offer an alternative perspective? Rachel looked back at the strange light in the sky, at the people on the street oscillating between wonder and fear, at the evidence of systematic information control spread across the table before her. Her grandmother had prepared her for this moment, not through prophecy or superstition, but through instilling in her a commitment to truth and a skepticism toward official narratives. Whatever was happening, whatever convergence of natural cycles or fulfillment of ancient patterns was unfolding, people deserved to know the full context, not just the version approved by government agencies and tech billionaires. I need to get to a computer, she said decisively, and I need to be in position to cover Hammond's announcement, but not from the official press pool. Riley nodded, unsurprised by her decision. Simon can provide secure communication equipment, and I believe we can get you close enough to Hammond's announcement to observe without being observed yourself. What about Daniel? Simon asked. He'll be looking for you. Rachel thought for a moment, then typed a quick reply to her editor. Working on earthquake story from the field. Will file remotely. Planning to cover Hammond announcement from affected neighborhood for ground-level perspective. It wasn't a direct lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. A journalistic gray area she rarely occupied, but that seemed necessary under the circumstances. Let's go, she said, gathering the most crucial documents into her bag. Whatever's happening, whatever's coming next, people deserve more than a managed narrative. They deserve the truth, as much of it as we can uncover. As they left the bookshop, stepping into a city transformed by strange light and post-earthquake tension, Rachel felt a peculiar clarity. The journalist who had dismissed her grandmother's warnings as superstition now stood at the intersection of ancient prophecy and modern crisis, dedicated to uncovering whatever truth lay at the heart of both. Above them, between Manhattan's towers, the disk of light continued to grow. The Hammond Technologies headquarters dominated the Hudson Yards development, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to capture and amplify the strange light now permeating the city. From their vantage point in a service apartment in a neighboring building, Rachel, Riley, and Simon had an unobstructed view of both the Hammond building and the circular distortion expanding in the sky above Manhattan. It's almost elegant, Rachel murmured, watching the disk of light pulse with colors that had no names in any human language. If it weren't so terrifying, the ancients would have called it a divine sign, Riley observed. Modern science struggles to classify it at all. Simon, who had transformed the apartment into an impromptu communication center with equipment pulled from various bags and cases, looked up from his monitors. Whatever it is, it's affecting electronic systems citywide. Power fluctuations, communication disruptions, navigation errors. And it's not just New York. Similar phenomena are being reported globally. Rachel reviewed her notes, organizing what she knew into a coherent narrative. Her years of investigative journalism had taught her that even the most complex story could be distilled to its essential elements. The who, what, when, where, why, and how that formed the backbone of reporting. The what was clear enough. Unprecedented natural phenomena following a specific sequence that aligned with an ancient prophecy. The when and where were equally straightforward, now globally with particular intensity in major urban centers. The who and why were murkier. Was this simply a convergence of natural cycles, as Amar had suggested? Or was there some deeper pattern, some force, natural or otherwise, shaping these events? And what role did people like Hammond and organizations like Project Cassandra play in the unfolding scenario? As for the how these phenomena were manifesting, how they connected to the prophecy, how humanity should respond, that remained the greatest mystery of all. Hammond's broadcast begins in 20 minutes, Simon announced, checking one of his monitors. All major networks have cleared their schedules. Social media platforms are promoting it as a critical public safety announcement. They're building this up as the moment when everything gets explained, or when a carefully crafted narrative gets established, Rachel countered. Based on what we know about Hammond's connections to Project Cassandra and information control efforts, this is likely an attempt to seize control of public perception. Precisely, Riley agreed, which is why your counter-narrative is so essential. The truth may be complex and uncertain, but people deserve more than a sanitized version designed to advance Hammond's agenda. Rachel had spent the past hour writing what amounted to a preliminary investigative report, synthesizing everything she had learned about the prophecy, the anomalies, and the systematic suppression of information surrounding both. She had corroborating evidence, expert testimony, leaked documents, all the elements of a solid journalistic exposé. What she lacked was a publishing platform. The Daily wouldn't run it, not with Daniel effectively serving as an information supervisor for Project Cassandra. Major online news sites were increasingly dominated by Hammond-owned media companies, and social media algorithms could easily bury her story if it contradicted the official narrative. "Upload ready?" Simon asked, gesturing to her laptop. Rachel nodded, transferring her completed article to a thumb drive. "But I'm still not convinced about your distribution method. Hijacking emergency alert systems is crossing a line, potentially a legal one." "We're not hijacking anything," Simon corrected. "We're utilizing a vulnerability in the system that the authorities themselves created. After the Hawaii false missile alert fiasco a few years ago, they built backdoor access points to allow rapid correction of erroneous messages. We're simply using those access points for their intended purpose, to correct misinformation. By that logic, we're performing a public service," Riley added with the faintest hint of a smile. Rachel wasn't entirely convinced by the ethical justification, but she recognized the necessity. If Hammond's announcement went unchallenged, his version of events would become the dominant narrative, potentially obscuring crucial information and context. "All right," she conceded, handing the thumb drive to Simon. "But we time it to go out immediately after Hammond's broadcast, not during. People should hear both sides before making judgments." Simon nodded, inserting the drive into a specialized device connected to his laptop. "Ready when you are. And remember, this will go to every smartphone in the region simultaneously, with links to the full article, supporting documentation, and corroborating sources." Rachel turned her attention back to the window, where the disk of light now occupied a significant portion of the visible sky. It had stabilized somewhat, its rotation slowing to a measured pulse that seemed almost rhythmic. People had gathered in the streets below to watch, their faces illuminated by its otherworldly glow. "It's time," Simon said, turning up the volume on a monitor displaying multiple news broadcasts simultaneously. All showed the Hammond Technologies logo, followed by a special announcement banner. Ezra Hammond appeared on screen, seated in what appeared to be a high-tech control room. Behind him, wall-sized displays showed real-time data about the anomalies occurring worldwide. He was in his late 50s, with the trim physique and perfect grooming of a tech executive who considered his appearance part of his brand. His expression was grave but composed, a man prepared to handle a crisis. "My fellow citizens," he began, his voice carrying the carefully modulated cadence of someone who had practiced this address extensively. "I speak to you today in a moment of unprecedented global significance. The phenomena we are witnessing, from the solar activity to the seismic events to the atmospheric anomalies now visible in our skies, represent a convergence of natural cycles that occurs perhaps once every several thousand years." Rachel glanced at Riley, noting how closely Hammond's opening mirrored Amara's scientific assessment. This was the first layer of the strategy. Begin with plausible, verifiable scientific facts to establish credibility. "For over a decade," Hammond continued, Hammond Technologies has been working with international scientific organizations and government agencies to prepare for this eventuality. What you are seeing is not cause for alarm, but rather the visible manifestation of a natural transition in Earth's complex systems, one that our ancestors may have witnessed and recorded in various cultural traditions, including what some know as the prophecy of Saint Malachi. He's co-opting the prophecy, Riley murmured, claiming it as validation rather than denying it. Smart, Rachel acknowledged reluctantly. He's preventing anyone from using it against him by embracing it himself. Hammond gestured to the displays behind him, which showed the circular phenomena now visible in skies around the world. These manifestations, while spectacular, are primarily electromagnetic in nature, the result of interactions between solar radiation and Earth's magnetic field. They pose no direct threat to human health or safety. The camera pulled back to reveal more of the control room, where dozens of technicians worked at advanced consoles. Hammond walked toward a central platform dominated by what appeared to be a holographic projection of Earth, surrounded by pulsing energy fields. However, his tone grew more serious. These electromagnetic anomalies are disrupting critical infrastructure worldwide: power grids, communication networks, transportation systems. If left unchecked, this disruption could lead to significant humanitarian crises in vulnerable regions. Here it comes, Rachel thought. The pivot from explanation to solution. Hammond positioning himself and his technology as humanity's salvation. Fortunately, we have prepared for this moment, Hammond continued, his confidence unwavering. Over the past 5 years, Hammond Technologies has developed and deployed a global network of stabilization arrays, advanced electromagnetic field generators designed specifically to counteract these anomalies and protect essential infrastructure. The displays behind him changed to show installations around the world, massive structures resembling high-tech transmission towers surrounded by concentric rings of smaller devices. At my signal, this network will activate, creating a protective field that will stabilize electromagnetic conditions within major population centers. This will not stop the natural cycle from progressing, but it will mitigate its most disruptive effects, allowing civilization to continue functioning normally during this transition period. The camera moved in for a close-up of Hammond's face, earnest, determined, trustworthy. I want to emphasize that these measures are temporary. The current anomalies, while dramatic, are part of a natural cycle that will eventually stabilize on its own. Our intervention is designed solely to protect critical systems during the peak disturbance phase. He's lying, Simon said, fingers flying across his keyboard as he analyzed the images of the stabilization arrays. Those aren't just electromagnetic field generators. Based on their configuration and energy requirements, they could just as easily be used for atmospheric manipulation, weather control, or even mass surveillance under the guise of protection. Rachel watched as Hammond approached what appeared to be a ceremonial activation console, a bit of theatrical flair that seemed calculated for maximum dramatic effect. With the authorization of the United Nations Security Council and the support of governments worldwide, I am now activating the Global Stabilization Network. Citizens may experience brief disruptions to electronic devices as the system initiates, but these will resolve quickly as stabilization is achieved. Hammond placed his hand on a glowing panel. The displays behind him showed a wave of energy emanating from the stabilization arrays, spreading across digital representations of cities worldwide. Activation complete, he announced after a moment. Stabilization fields will reach full strength within approximately 30 minutes. During this period, please remain calm and follow any instructions from local authorities. He returned to his original position, his expression now one of reassuring confidence. Throughout human history, moments of great transition have often been accompanied by fear and uncertainty, but they have also presented opportunities for advancement and renewal. Together, we will navigate this natural cycle safely, emerging stronger and more united than before. The broadcast concluded with contact information for Hammond Technologies' public information centers and a list of resources for those seeking more information about the anomalies and stabilization efforts. As the screen returned to regular news coverage, all focusing on Hammond's announcement with overwhelmingly positive analysis, Rachel, Riley, and Simon exchanged troubled glances. That was masterful, Rachel admitted grudgingly. He acknowledged the prophecy, offered a scientific explanation that neither confirms nor denies supernatural elements, positioned himself as the prepared protector, and framed the whole thing as a manageable natural event. Classic information control strategy, Riley agreed. Acknowledge enough truth to establish credibility, then shape the narrative in the desired direction. Simon was focused on his monitors, which were displaying real-time data about the phenomena. Something's happening, he reported. The anomalies are changing pattern, not diminishing, but shifting somehow. Rachel moved to the window. The disk of light above Manhattan was indeed changing, its rotation accelerating again, but now with a more structured pattern, almost like a massive gear turning in the sky. And it seemed to be responding directly to the activation of Hammond's stabilization array, visible as a pulsing tower atop a neighboring skyscraper. He's not stabilizing it, she realized. He's directing it. Whatever these phenomena are, his technology isn't protecting us from them. It's harnessing them. For what purpose? Riley asked, joining her at the window. Control, Rachel said simply. The ultimate form of information management. Reshape reality itself rather than just the narrative about it. She turned back to Simon. We need to send the counter-narrative now, before the stabilization fields reach full strength. If Hammond's technology can manipulate these phenomena, it can probably block our transmission too. Simon nodded grimly, fingers poised over his keyboard. Ready when you are. Rachel took a deep breath, mentally reviewing everything that had led her to this point. Her grandmother's warnings, the verified patterns of anomalies, the documented history of information suppression, and now Hammond's carefully orchestrated solution. The story needed to be told, the full context revealed, before Hammond's version became the only accessible truth. Send it, she instructed. Simon pressed a sequence of keys. For a moment, nothing happened. Then all their phones simultaneously emitted the distinctive alert tone of the emergency broadcast system. Rachel checked her screen to see her own words displayed under an emergency information update header. Important correction to recent broadcast. Evidence indicates the stabilization arrays activated by Ezra Hammond are not designed to protect civilian infrastructure, but to manipulate atmospheric phenomena for purposes not disclosed to the public. Documentation reveals Hammond Technologies' connection to Project Cassandra, a government initiative controlling information about these events for decades. Full investigation with supporting evidence available at the secure link below. Download immediately before potential communications disruption. Link is already getting thousands of hits, Simon reported, watching a data counter on his screen tick rapidly upward. People are downloading the complete article and documentation. Rachel nodded, feeling a complex mix of professional satisfaction and personal apprehension. She had done what any good journalist would do, reported the truth as best she could determine it, provided evidence and context, and allowed the public to make informed judgments. Yet the scale and significance of this particular story went far beyond anything she had tackled before. Look, Riley said suddenly, pointing toward the Hammond Technologies tower. A visible pulse of energy was emanating from the stabilization array on its roof, a rippling wave that spread outward and upward toward the disk of light. As it reached the phenomenon, the disk's rotation pattern changed again, becoming more erratic, almost as if the two forces were in conflict. Hammond's people will trace the emergency alert to us soon, Simon warned, beginning to disconnect and pack his equipment. We should relocate before... He never finished the sentence. A massive pulse of light from the aerial phenomenon bathed the city in blinding radiance for several seconds. When Rachel could see again, every electronic device in the room had gone dark. Simon's sophisticated equipment, their phones, even the battery-powered emergency lamp in the corner. EMP, Simon said grimly, but focused somehow, targeting specific areas. From their window, they could see that power had been cut to their building and several surrounding blocks. But tellingly, the Hammond Technologies tower remained fully illuminated, its stabilization array still pulsing with energy. He's isolating opposition, Riley concluded, neutralizing anyone who might challenge his narrative while maintaining his own capability to broadcast. Rachel moved quickly to gather her notes and the physical copies of key documents. We need to get this information out through alternative channels. Old school if necessary, print, word of mouth, physical distribution. There's a contingency network in place, Riley assured her. People ready to spread information if digital methods are compromised. But first, we need to get to somewhere safer. Hammond now knows someone is challenging his narrative, and he has the resources to identify and neutralize threats. As they prepared to leave the darkened apartment, Rachel took one last look at the aerial phenomenon. Its pattern had stabilized again, now turning in perfect synchronization with the pulses from Hammond's array. Whatever contest of wills had briefly played out in the sky above Manhattan, Hammond's technology appeared to have prevailed for the moment. Yet something about the phenomenon still seemed to resist complete control. Subtle variations in its rotation, occasional pulses of independent light that broke the established pattern, as if it were not merely a natural event being manipulated by technology, but something with its own complex dynamics only partially understood by those attempting to harness it. Rachel remembered her grandmother's final journal entry. The convergence cannot be controlled, only guided. Those who mistake influence for mastery will learn the ancient lesson, that the forces beyond our understanding follow patterns we can observe, but never fully command. As they slipped out of the building into streets filled with confused citizens, staring at dead phones and darkened buildings, Rachel felt the weight of her role in what was unfolding. She had chosen to challenge the official narrative, to offer an alternative perspective based on the evidence she had gathered. Now she had to follow through, to continue investigating, reporting, revealing, no matter where the story led. Above them, between the towers of the partly darkened city, the disk of light continued its measured rotation, neither fully tame nor completely wild, a cosmic question mark hanging over a world in transition. The following days unfolded like a surreal chess match played across the global stage. Hammond's stabilization narrative dominated official channels. Government briefings, major news outlets, and functioning social media platforms all amplified his message of technological salvation and managed transition. But Rachel's counter-narrative persisted, spreading through alternative networks. Printouts passed hand to hand, amateur radio broadcasts, independent journalists who still valued truth over access, and the thousands who had downloaded her complete investigation before the targeted communications blackout. New York had been divided into functional and non-functional zones, areas where Hammond's technology maintained power and communications, and dead zones where resistance to his narrative was strongest. Similar patterns emerged in major cities worldwide, creating a patchwork of controlled and contested spaces, both physical and informational. Rachel had spent the past 72 hours in constant motion, gathering new evidence, connecting with sources, and distributing updated reports through Riley's network of academics, journalists, and concerned citizens. The story had evolved from her initial investigation into something more collaborative, a crowdsourced truth-finding mission in defiance of the official version of events. Now, as sunset painted the sky in colors almost as strange as the persistent disk of light that had become a fixture above the city, Rachel stood on the roof of an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, watching Manhattan's divided skyline across the East River. Some buildings blazed with light, others remained dark, a physical manifestation of the information divide splitting the population. Beautiful in a dystopian sort of way, said Amara Okafor, joining her at the edge of the roof. The geophysicist had arrived from Boston the previous day, bringing crucial scientific analyses that helped explain what Hammond's technology was actually doing to the atmospheric phenomena. I keep thinking about how ordinary everything was just a week ago, Rachel replied. The Pope's death seemed like just another news story. Now look at us, hiding out, distributing samizdat reports about cosmic phenomena and government cover-ups. History often pivots on such moments, Amar observed. Periods where multiple possible futures branch from a single point of decision or revelation. Rachel nodded, reviewing their current understanding of the situation in her mind. Hammond's stabilization arrays were indeed interacting with the atmospheric phenomena, not suppressing them, but subtly redirecting their energies. The technology appeared designed to channel the phenomana's electromagnetic properties into a global network that could potentially monitor and influence everything from weather patterns to digital communications to human brain activity itself. It was the ultimate surveillance and control system, disguised as protection from natural disaster. And it was being deployed with the full cooperation of governments worldwide, all too eager to embrace a solution that promised stability while expanding their power. Riley's contact at No Way confirmed our suspicions, Rachel said. The arrays aren't just passive receivers. They're actively directing energy back into the atmospheric phenomena, creating a feedback loop that increases their power and reach. Precisely what my models predicted, Amar agreed. But there's something they didn't account for. The phenomena themselves seem to be adapting to the manipulation. almost as if they're learning. This had been the most unsettling discovery of the past days. Whatever these atmospheric manifestations were, whether purely natural events as Hammond claimed, or something more complex as Rachel's investigation suggested, they displayed patterns that defied simple classification. They responded to the stabilization arrays in increasingly sophisticated ways, sometimes conforming to Hammond's direction, other times exhibiting unexpected behaviors that his technology scrambled to accommodate. Simon's latest analysis just came in, Rachel said, checking her jury-rigged communication device, a modified amateur radio adapted to receive encrypted digital transmissions from their network. He's detected a new pattern emerging in the phenomana's rotation cycle, some kind of acceleration or intensification building toward something. A climax point, Amara suggested. If these phenomena follow natural cycles as I believe they do, we may be approaching a peak phase, a moment of maximum intensity before the system begins to normalize. And Hammond is trying to control that peak moment, Rachel concluded, to harness whatever energy or effect it produces for his own purposes. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Riley, accompanied by a young woman Rachel hadn't met before. Sharp-eyed and alert, dressed in the practical clothes of someone accustomed to moving unnoticed. Jennifer Chen, Riley introduced her. Department of Energy whistleblower. She has information about Hammond's endgame. I was part of the team analyzing the preliminary test data from the stabilization arrays, Jennifer explained without preamble. What they're calling stabilization is actually phase manipulation. They're trying to synchronize the atmospheric phenomena with specific electromagnetic frequencies that can interface with both digital systems and neural activity. Mind control? Rachel asked skeptically, her journalist caution reasserting itself. Not directly, Jennifer clarified. More like influence enhancement. The technology can amplify certain types of messaging, making them more persuasive, more likely to be accepted without critical examination. It's the next evolution of the information control strategies Hammond has been developing for years. And the timing? Amara inquired. When do they plan to activate this capability? Tonight, Jennifer said grimly. When the atmospheric phenomena reach what our models project as peak intensity, approximately 10:37 p.m. Eastern Time. Hammond plans a global broadcast at that exact moment, using the enhanced influence effect to establish his narrative as the dominant reality worldwide. Rachel checked her watch. Just over 3 hours away. We need to warn people. Get them to turn off all devices, avoid the broadcast entirely. That's why I came to you, Jennifer said. Your network is the only independent information channel with sufficient reach. But even if you succeed, Hammond has contingencies. The atmospheric manipulation will continue, just more gradually. He's playing a long game. Rachel processed this information, journalist instincts automatically organizing it into a coherent picture. Hammond wasn't just controlling the narrative about the phenomena, he was using the phenomena themselves to enhance his control over all future narratives. It was information management raised to a cosmic level. We need to do more than warn people, Riley said, voicing what Rachel was thinking. We need to disrupt the broadcast itself, or better yet, the connection between the broadcast and the atmospheric amplification. The primary control center is in Hammond Tower, Jennifer offered. That's where the broadcast will originate, synchronized precisely with signals to all stabilization arrays worldwide. Getting in would be impossible, Amara pointed out. The security... Actually, Jennifer interrupted, I still have active credentials. The system blacklist hasn't been updated to include me yet. I could get a small team inside, but only for a short window. They all looked at Rachel, recognizing that this had evolved beyond a journalistic investigation into something more direct. A choice to actively intervene rather than simply report. Rachel thought of her grandmother's words about making choices when the moment came. Was this what Mary had foreseen? Not Rachel as passive chronicler of events, but as an active participant in their resolution? If we do this, she said carefully, we need to be clear about our objective. We're not destroying anything or hurting anyone. We're simply ensuring that people have access to unmanipulated information so they can make their own informed choices. The journalist's prime directive, Riley nodded, truth before influence. There's a technical vulnerability we could exploit, Jennifer suggested. The system requires precise synchronization between Hammond's broadcast and the atmospheric phenomena. If we could introduce a desynchronization, even by a few seconds, it would prevent the enhanced influence effect from establishing. And how would we do that? Rachel asked. By accessing the master control console and adjusting the timing parameters, Jennifer explained, it wouldn't stop the broadcast, but it would ensure it goes out as normal communication, subject to people's natural critical faculties, rather than as enhanced persuasion. The plan took shape quickly. Jennifer would use her credentials to get Rachel and Amara inside Hammond Tower under the guise of technical consultants. Riley would coordinate from outside, managing communication with their broader network and preparing to distribute Rachel's final report, whatever they discovered inside. As they gathered equipment and made final preparations, Rachel took a moment alone on the roof, watching the disk of light above Manhattan pulse with increasing intensity. Its rotation had accelerated noticeably even in the past hour, and new patterns were emerging within its structure, concentric rings of energy flowing inward and outward in complex rhythms. She thought about her journey over the past week, from skeptical journalists dismissing her grandmother's superstitions to someone standing on the threshold of direct action against a global-scale attempt at information control. Had Mary known it would unfold this way? Had she somehow seen this moment in Rachel's future? Not through prophecy, Rachel murmured to herself, but through knowing me. Knowing what I would do when confronted with evidence of truth being suppressed. Whatever cosmic or natural forces were manifesting in the sky above, whatever ancient patterns were repeating or new ones emerging, the human element remained constant. The tension between control and freedom, between managed narratives and messy truths, between those who would decide for many and those who insisted each must decide for themselves. Hammond Tower loomed like a monolith of light amid the partially darkened city. Its stabilization array pulsed with increasing power as the moment of convergence approached, sending visible waves of energy toward the atmospheric disk above. Rachel, Amara, and Jennifer approached through the underground parking structure, where Jennifer's credentials still granted access. They wore the anonymous business attire of corporate consultants, carrying tablets and equipment cases that concealed both monitoring devices and communications gear connected to Riley's network. "Security checkpoint ahead," Jennifer warned as they reached the executive elevator bank. "Follow my lead, speak only if directly addressed, and remember, we're supposed to be here." The guard barely glanced at Jennifer's credentials before waving them through, his attention fixed on the multiple security monitors showing the increasingly dramatic atmospheric effects visible from the tower's exterior cameras. The elevator whisked them to the 87th floor, the technical heart of Hammond's operation, where the broadcast would be synchronized with the atmospheric phenomena. As the doors opened, they stepped into a hive of activity, dozens of technicians monitoring stations arranged in concentric circles around a central platform where Hammond himself stood, reviewing final preparations. "This way," Jennifer murmured, guiding them toward a secondary control station positioned away from the main activity. "We need to access the synchronization parameters without drawing attention." They moved purposefully through the room, projecting the confident body language of people who belong there. Rachel observed everything with a journalist's trained eye. The technology far more advanced than anything publicly known. The palpable tension as technicians made final adjustments. The views of the atmospheric disk on wall-sized displays showing its accelerating rotation and increasingly complex internal patterns. "It's almost alive," Amara whispered, staring at the high-resolution images. "The way it's responding to the array's signals? It's not just reacting, but anticipating, adapting." "Focus," Jennifer reminded her as they reached the auxiliary console. "We have minutes at most before someone questions our presence." While Jennifer began accessing the synchronization controls, Rachel surreptitiously activated the recording devices concealed in her equipment case, documenting everything: the technology, the preparations, the atmospheric response. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence of what Hammond had actually built and how it connected to the phenomena. "We have a problem," Jennifer said quietly, her fingers pausing over the controls. "The synchronization system has been upgraded since my last access. There's a new authentication requirement I can't bypass." Rachel scanned the room, noting the increasing activity as the convergence moment approached. Hammond now stood at the central platform, surrounded by key technical staff reviewing final readiness checks. On the displays above, a countdown timer showed less than 15 minutes remaining. "We need another approach," Amara suggested. "If we can't desynchronize from here, perhaps we can introduce interference at a different point in the system." Jennifer considered this. The broadcast feed itself, if we could delay it by even a few seconds relative to the atmospheric pulse, it would break the enhancement effect. And how do we do that? Rachel asked. Before Jennifer could answer, a security alert flashed across several screens, accompanied by a subtle shift in the room's energy as personnel began checking stations and eyeing unfamiliar faces. "They've flagged your credentials," Amara whispered to Jennifer. "We need to move now," but it was too late. Security personnel were already moving in their direction, hands moving to weapons as they approached. Hammond himself looked up from the central platform, his gaze fixing on the three women with cold recognition. "Aitken, Rachel Kovalski," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the room. "I thought you might join us for the culmination, though I expected you to come as a journalist, not an infiltrator." The room fell silent as Hammond descended from the platform and approached them, security teams forming a perimeter to prevent escape. Up close, he seemed different from his broadcast image. Older somehow, with an intensity in his eyes that bordered on fanatical. "You've been quite persistent in your alternative narrative," he continued, stopping a few paces away. "Admirable in a way, but ultimately futile. The story that matters isn't the one you've been telling about the past, about prophecies and cover-ups and control. It's the one I'm about to tell about the future. A future where you use these phenomena to manipulate global consciousness," Rachel countered, abandoning any pretense now that they'd been discovered. "Enhancing your message with whatever energy or effect is being channeled through your arrays." Hammond's expression registered brief surprise before settling into something like reluctant respect. "You've pieced together more than I expected. Yes, the convergence offers a unique opportunity, a moment when the barriers between information and consciousness become temporarily permeable. My technology simply leverages that permeability." "To what end?" Rachel demanded, aware that she was now effectively conducting an interview in the middle of a failed infiltration. "What gives you the right to reshape how people perceive reality?" "Necessity," Hammond replied simply. "Humanity faces challenges too complex for traditional decision-making processes. Climate collapse, resource depletion, technological disruption. We need alignment, a shared understanding and purpose that transcends our tribal divisions." "Forced alignment isn't unity," Rachel argued. "It's control. A semantic distinction that history won't remember," Hammond dismissed with a wave of his hand. "What matters is survival, progress, the continuation of civilization through its next evolutionary threshold." As they spoke, the atmospheric disk visible on the surrounding displays continued its acceleration, new patterns emerging within its structure with increasing complexity. The countdown timer now showed less than 10 minutes remaining. "You don't understand what you're interfacing with," Amara interjected, her scientific caution overriding concerns about their predicament. "These phenomena display attributes suggesting emergent intelligence, adaptive responses that indicate they aren't merely passive energy manifestations. You're creating a feedback loop with a system you don't fully comprehend." Hammond's confidence wavered slightly. "Our models account for all observed behaviors. The phenomena are complex but ultimately predictable. Natural systems responding to precise technological inputs." "Like the weather is predictable?" Amara challenged. "Complex systems develop emergent properties beyond their individual components. What you're seeing now, these new patterns forming within the disk, those weren't in your models, were they?" Hammond's glance toward the displays confirmed her suspicion. The atmospheric disk had indeed developed formations unlike anything previously observed or predicted, spiral structures within its rotation that seemed to move independently of the whole, creating interference patterns with the energy pulses from the stabilization array. "Minor variations," Hammond insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "The fundamental synchronization will proceed as planned." "And if it doesn't?" Rachel pressed. "If these phenomena are more than you understand, if they're responding to your technology in ways you haven't anticipated, what then? You're gambling with global consciousness based on incomplete understanding." For a moment, doubt flickered across Hammond's face. Then his resolve hardened. "Enough. Security, escort our guests to the containment level. They can witness the broadcast from there." As security personnel moved to take them, a technician called urgently from the central platform. "Sir, we're detecting anomalous patterns in the array's feedback loop. The atmospheric response is diverging from projected parameters." Hammond turned sharply toward the displays where the disk's behavior was visibly changing, its rotation developing a counter-rhythm that clashed with the pulses from the array, creating visual interference patterns like ripples in a disturbed pond. Compensate, Hammond ordered, striding back toward the central platform. Adjust the array's output to match the new rotation pattern. We're trying, sir, the technician replied, fingers flying across controls. But it's adapting faster than we can recalibrate. It's almost as if it's deliberately evading synchronization. In the momentary confusion, Rachel caught Jennifer's eye, noting her subtle gesture toward a nearby emergency alarm panel. Understanding immediately, Rachel nodded and began slowly shifting position, preparing for their last opportunity to disrupt Hammond's plan. 2 minutes to convergence peak, announced an automated voice as the countdown continued. Hammond now stood at the central console, personally directing attempts to restore the planned synchronization between the broadcast and the increasingly erratic atmospheric phenomena. Now, Jennifer suddenly shouted, lunging toward the alarm panel and smashing it with her equipment case. Immediately, sirens blared throughout the floor. Automatic fire protocols engage, sprinklers activating and emergency lighting replacing the normal illumination. In the chaos, Rachel, Amara, and Jennifer broke away from their distracted guards, moving rapidly toward a service exit Jennifer had identified during their planning. "Stop them!" Hammond shouted over the alarms, but his technical team was fully occupied with the deteriorating synchronization, and security personnel were conflicted between pursuing the intruders and maintaining their posts during an emergency. As they reached the service corridor, Rachel paused for one final look at the central room. The displays showed the atmospheric disk now in full disruption, its elegant rotation fractured into competing patterns that negated each other. The energy pulses from the stabilization array seemed to be absorbed without effect, like waves disappearing into sand. 30 seconds to convergence, the automated voice announced as Rachel pulled the service door closed behind them. They raced down emergency stairs, Jennifer leading them toward a maintenance exit that would bypass the main security checkpoints. Behind them, alarms continued to wail as Hammond's carefully orchestrated moment of global influence dissolved into technological failure and atmospheric unpredictability. "We may not have stopped the broadcast," Jennifer panted as they descended, "but the synchronization is broken. Whatever enhanced effect Hammond planned won't materialize. Just failure. It was adaptation. The phenomena are developing their own patterns independent of Hammond's technology." They reached the maintenance exit, emerging into an alleyway several blocks from the tower. The night sky above Manhattan was transformed, the disk of light now fragmented into multiple smaller formations that spun and combined in patterns of mesmerizing complexity. People stood in streets and on rooftops, all normal activity suspended as humanity collectively witnessed the unprecedented spectacle. "We need to get clear of the area," Jennifer urged. "Hammond will send security to find us once they stabilize their systems." But Rachel stood transfixed, watching the atmospheric display. "Look," she said, pointing skyward. "It's changing again." The fragmentary patterns were indeed shifting, coalescing back toward a unified formation, but not the smooth disk of earlier days. This new structure was more intricate, with spiraling arms extending outward from a brilliant central core. It resembled nothing so much as a galaxy in miniature, rotating majestically above the city. "The convergence," Amara whispered. This is what it was building toward all along. Their communication device buzzed, Riley checking their status from the Brooklyn safe house. "We're out," Rachel reported. Hammond's broadcast synchronization failed, but the atmospheric phenomena are evolving. "Have you ever seen anything like this in the historical records, Riley?" "Never with this level of complexity," his voice crackled through the device. "But similar formations appear in ancient astronomical texts, depicted as celestial wheels or the eye of heaven. Whatever we're witnessing has manifested before, though perhaps not in recorded history." As they watched, the galaxy-like formation continued to evolve, its rotations steadying into a measured rhythm that seemed to pulse with its own internal logic, independent of Hammond's technology. The stabilization array atop the tower was still active, sending energy pulses skyward, but they appeared to pass through the formation without affecting its structure or movement. "Hammond's lost control," Jennifer observed. "Whatever connection his technology temporarily established with these phenomena, it's been severed or transformed into something he didn't anticipate." Rachel's journalistic mind was racing, processing the implications of what they were witnessing. Hammond had attempted to harness these phenomena for information control, to enhance his ability to shape narrative and perception. But the phenomena themselves had evolved beyond his ability to direct, developing patterns that suggested not just complexity, but agency. "We need to document this," she said, retrieving a small camera from her equipment case. "Whatever happens next, people deserve to see it without Hammond's interpretation mediating their understanding." As she began recording, the galaxy-like formation above reached what appeared to be a state of perfect equilibrium, its rotation neither accelerating nor slowing, its structure neither expanding nor contracting. It hung above the city like a cosmic question mark, defying both scientific explanation and technological control. "What do you think it is?" Rachel asked Amara, who was studying the formation with professional intensity despite their precarious situation. "Really, scientifically, what are we looking at?" The geophysicist considered for a long moment before answering. "I believe we're witnessing the visible manifestation of cyclic patterns that normally operate beyond our perception. Interactions between Earth's magnetic field, solar radiation, and cosmic energies that occur perhaps once every few thousand years. Ancient people may have observed previous manifestations and interpreted them through religious or mystical frameworks, as signs from gods or omens of change." "And are they?" Rachel pressed. "Signs or omens, I mean." Amara smiled slightly. "Science doesn't deal in signs and omens. But these phenomena do coincide with periods of significant transition in human history. Technological shifts, cultural transformations, the rise and fall of civilizations. Whether that's causation or correlation remains unclear." "One thing is clear," Jennifer interjected, checking her watch. "Hammond's broadcast moment has passed. Whatever enhanced influence effect he planned has been disrupted by the phenomena's independent evolution." They made their way through side streets toward a rendezvous point where Riley's associates would transport them back to the Brooklyn safe house. All around them, people remained focused on the sky, many recording with phones or simply watching in silent wonder. There was no panic, no chaos, just collective witnessing of something beyond ordinary experience. Rachel's thoughts turned to her grandmother. Had Mary somehow intuited this moment? Not through supernatural prophecy, but through careful observation of patterns others dismissed, through connecting historical dots across centuries of human experience? The prophecy of the 112th Pope hadn't predicted the end of the world. It had marked the beginning of a transition, a convergence of cycles both natural and human. "Hammond was right about one thing," she said as they walked. "This is a threshold moment, not because of his technology or the prophecy itself, but because of how humanity responds to what we're witnessing. Do we surrender to manipulation and control, or do we face uncertainty with open eyes and critical minds?" The journalist's question, Amara noted with approval, always circling back to human choice and agency. They reached the rendezvous point, an abandoned subway entrance cordoned off during the recent disruptions. As they prepared to descend, Rachel took one final look at the phenomenon above Manhattan. Its galaxy-like structure remained steady, but now subtle waves of color were rippling through its spiral arms. Blues, greens, violets, and hues that seemed to exist at the very edge of human perception. "Beautiful," she murmured, raising her camera for one last recording. At that exact moment, something changed. The formation's steady rotation faltered, then accelerated suddenly. Its structure contracted, the spiral arms drawing inward toward the brilliant core. Light intensified until it was almost painful to look at directly. "Something's happening," Jennifer said unnecessarily, all of them frozen in place despite the risk of remaining exposed. The phenomenon continued its rapid contraction, condensing into a sphere of pure white light that pulsed with increasing frequency. Then, without warning, it expanded outward in a silent flash that illuminated the entire city as if in full daylight for a single, breathtaking second. And then it was gone. Where the complex formation had been, only empty night sky remained. Stars once again visible above Manhattan, the moon partially obscured by normal clouds. No trace of the phenomenon remained visible to the naked eye, though Rachel knew scientific instruments would detect residual effects for days or weeks to come. Around them, the city seemed to hold its breath. Then gradually, normal sounds resumed. Traffic, distant sirens, human voices expressing wonder and confusion. The moment of convergence had passed, leaving humanity changed not by Hammond's technological manipulation, but by collective witness of something beyond explanation. "What happens now?" Jennifer asked as they finally descended toward their transportation. "Now," Rachel replied, securing her camera and notes, "we tell the story. Not Hammond's version, not whatever the government tries to shape it into, but what we actually saw and experienced. The evidence, the context, the unanswered questions, all of it." "And the prophecy?" Amar asked. How does that fit into your reporting? Rachel considered this carefully. As historical context, one of many ways humans have tried to understand these cyclic patterns throughout history, not as supernatural prediction, but as observation encoded in the language and framework available to those who witnessed similar phenomena in the past. They reached the waiting vehicle and climbed inside. As they pulled away from Manhattan, the city's skyline was returning to normal, power gradually restoring to darkened areas, Hammond Tower's stabilization array now dormant, the night sky ordinary once more. But Rachel knew that appearances of normalcy were deceptive. Whatever had manifested above them, whatever convergence of natural cycles or cosmic energies had briefly become visible, had changed the world. Not through apocalyptic destruction or divine judgment, but through the simple fact of having been witnessed globally, beyond any single government's or corporation's ability to control the narrative about what it meant. In her bag, Rachel carried the evidence that would form the backbone of her reporting. The historical patterns documented by her grandmother and Riley's network, the scientific analyses from Amara and other researchers, the technical details of Hammond's attempted manipulation, and most importantly, the raw footage of the phenomena themselves, evolving beyond technological control into something that defied simple explanation. And as their vehicle headed toward the Brooklyn safe house where she would begin crafting her report, Rachel knew with certainty that her grandmother had been right all along. Not because she had possessed supernatural foresight, but because she had understood that when such moments came, the most important thing was not prediction, but witness. Not control, but truth. Outside, the night sky above New York had returned to normal. But something had changed. In the world, Rachel looked up through the car window at the stars now visible above the city, feeling a profound sense of connection to her grandmother's legacy. Not of prophecy, but of persistent questioning. Not of certainty, but of the courage to face uncertainty with open eyes and critical mind.